Picture this. It's 1919, and you're standing in a Munich factory that just months ago was building some of the most advanced aircraft engines in the world. Engines that powered German fighters through the skies of World War I. Engines that climbed higher, ran smoother, and outperformed almost everything the Allies could put in the air. But today, right now, those engines are forbidden. The Treaty of Versailles has just been signed, and with the stroke of a pen, your entire industry has been wiped out. No more aircraft, no more engines, nothing. You're looking at empty production lines, brilliant engineers with nothing to build, and a future that looks absolutely catastrophic. This is the moment BMW died, or so everyone thought, because what happened next wasn't just a survival story. It was an accidental revolution that would create one of the most iconic automotive brands on the planet. But here's the twist that nobody talks about. BMW's first car wasn't designed by BMW. It wasn't even German. It was a tiny British automobile that the company bought out of pure desperation in 1928. A car so small, so modest, so unlike the powerful machines we associate with BMW today, that connecting the dots seems almost impossible. And yet that desperate decision set everything in motion. The M3, the 3 Series. The ultimate driving machine philosophy. All of it traces back to a failed aircraft company that had no choice but to reinvent itself or disappear forever. In 1918, BMW built some of the most advanced aircraft engines in the world. Their Inline-Six power plants could reach altitudes that left Allied fighters gasping for air. Then the Treaty of Versailles changed everything. Article 198 made it illegal for Germany to manufacture aircraft or aircraft engines of any kind. Overnight, BMW's core business became a crime. The company that had mastered the art of precision engineering at 20,000 feet now faced a choice: reinvent themselves completely or disappear. By the end of this video, you'll discover how BMW's desperate search for survival led them to acquire a tiny British car design they never intended to build. You'll see how their aircraft engineering culture, that obsession with precision and performance, accidentally transformed a humble economy car into something more. And you'll understand why BMW's identity as the ultimate driving machine didn't start with sports cars or luxury sedans, but with a licensed copy of the Austin 7 that they improved almost without meaning to. But first, we need to understand what BMW actually was before they ever built a car. The company that would become BMW started in 1913 as Rapp Motorenwerke, founded by Karl Rapp in Munich. They built aircraft engines but struggled to compete with established manufacturers. In 1916, as World War I intensified, Gustav Otto's aircraft company merged with Rapp's operation. And in 1917, the newly reorganized entity became Bayerische Motorenwerke GmbH. Notice something about that name: Bavarian Motor Works. Not Bavarian Aircraft Works, just motors. This seemingly minor detail would prove prophetic. The key figure in BMW's transformation was Franz Josef Popp, an engineer who'd worked for AEG and understood both technical excellence and business survival. Popp recruited Max Friz, a brilliant engine designer who would create BMW's first legendary product, the BMW 3A Inline-Six aircraft engine. What made the 3A special wasn't just power, it was Friz's high-altitude carburetor design that maintained performance where air pressure dropped. German fighters equipped with BMW engines could climb to altitudes Allied aircraft couldn't reach, a genuine tactical advantage born from engineering precision. When the armistice came in November 1918, BMW had approximately 3,500 employees and a reputation as one of Germany's premier engine manufacturers. Then came Versailles. The treaty's military restrictions were comprehensive and unforgiving. Germany couldn't build military aircraft, couldn't manufacture aircraft engines, couldn't even conduct most forms of aeronautical research. For BMW, this wasn't just a setback. It was an existential crisis. Everything they'd built their reputation on was now prohibited. Franz Josef Popp faced the kind of decision that breaks lesser leaders. He had a workforce of highly skilled engineers, machinists, and craftsmen trained to incredibly precise standards. Letting them go meant losing years of accumulated expertise. Keeping them meant finding anything else to manufacture. BMW's solution was to try everything. They built motorcycle engines, which were legal. They manufactured railway brakes. They even produced office furniture and household items. Imagine the engineers who'd calculated airflow dynamics at altitude, now designing metal cabinets. But none of it was enough. Post-war Germany was economically devastated, and the hyperinflation that would peak in 1923 was already beginning. A company known for premium engineering excellence couldn't sustain itself selling miscellaneous metal goods in a collapsing economy. By the MID-1920s, BMW was surviving primarily on motorcycle production. Their R32, introduced in 1923, was successful and showcased their engineering capabilities. But motorcycles alone couldn't support the company's scale or ambitions. Popp needed a breakthrough, and it would come from an unexpected direction. In Eisenach, about 400 kilometers north of Munich, there was a company called Fahrzeugfabrik Eisenach that had been building vehicles since the 1890s. In 1927, they'd acquired a license from Austin Motor Company in England to produce the Austin 7, a small, affordable car designed by Herbert Austin. The Germans called it the Dixie 315 PS, and despite its modest specifications, a 747 cubic centimeters four-cylinder engine producing just 15 horsepower, it was selling. In the uncertain German economy of the late 1920s, affordable mobility mattered more than performance. Here's where BMW's story takes its crucial turn. In late 1928, BMW acquired Fahrzeugfabrik Eisenach for 4 million Reichsmarks, and with it came the license to produce the Dixie. This wasn't BMW choosing to become a car manufacturer out of passion for automobiles. This was corporate survival. Popp saw a functioning business with an existing product and customer base. The automotive industry was growing. Building cars wasn't illegal. It was logical, even if it meant BMW's first car would be a British design they had no part in creating. The first BMW-badged automobile rolled out of the Eisenach factory in 1929 as the BMW 315 DA2, where DA stood for Deutsche Ausfuhrung, German version. Initially, it was virtually identical to the Austin 7 and the Dixie before it. Same basic design, same engine, same chassis. BMW was essentially a contract manufacturer, building someone else's car under license. But here's what makes this moment fascinating. BMW couldn't help being BMW. Their aircraft engine heritage, that culture of precision manufacturing that Popp and Franz had cultivated, started to influence everything. The evidence of this transformation is in the details. BMW engineers began making incremental improvements to the 315. They strengthened the chassis for German road conditions. They refined the engine assembly process with aircraft industry precision. They improved the brakes. These weren't radical redesigns. BMW was still bound by the Austin license, but the build quality began to distinguish BMW's version from its British parent. Customers started noticing that BMW Dixis felt more solid, more refined than the cars they were copied from. In 1932, BMW introduced something that revealed their true nature: the 320 AM1, also called the Wartburg. This was still based on Austin 7 mechanicals, but BMW had modified it significantly. The engine was bored out slightly to 782 cubic centimeters. The body was completely redesigned by BMW. More importantly, there was a sports version, the AM4, that produced 20 horsepower and could reach 80 kilometers per hour. Remember, this is 1932. BMW has been building cars for exactly 3 years, all based on someone else's design, and they're already creating sport variants. The aircraft engine DNA is starting to express itself. But BMW's management knew licensed production couldn't be their future. They needed their own design, something that would establish BMW as a real automobile manufacturer, not just a licensed assembler. In 1933, BMW hired Fritz Fiedler, a talented designer who'd worked at Horch, another prestigious German manufacturer. Fiedler's assignment was clear: create BMW's first original automobile. What he designed would become the BMW 303, and it would establish visual and technical themes that still define BMW today. The 303, introduced at the 1933 Berlin Auto Show, was a revelation. It featured a 1.2-liter inline-six engine. Notice the format: 6 cylinders in a line, just like BMW's aircraft engines. This wasn't coincidence. BMW's engineers knew inline-sixes. They understood their balance characteristics, their smooth power delivery, their potential for refinement. The 303 also introduced something you'd recognize immediately: the kidney grille. Those twin vertical grilles that define every BMW's face today first appeared on this car in 1933, a design element born from functional cooling requirements, but destined to become iconic. Here's what's remarkable about the 303. It made just 30 horsepower from 1.2 liters, which doesn't sound impressive until you understand what BMW was optimizing for. They weren't chasing maximum power. They were chasing refinement, smoothness, and reliability. The 303 wasn't the fastest car in its class, but it had a quality, a precision in how it drove and felt, that reflected its maker's background. Automotive journalists of the era noted the 303's build quality and the sophistication of its engineering. BMW was building cars like they'd built aircraft engines, precisely, methodically, with an attention to detail that bordered on obsessive. The real breakthrough came in 1936 with the BMW 328. If the 303 established BMW's identity, the 328 proved their capability. This was a sports car with a 2-liter inline-six producing 80 horsepower through innovative engine design, hemispherical combustion chambers, inclined valves, and a cross-flow cylinder head that improved breathing. The 328 could reach 150 kilometers per hour, extraordinary for 1936. But speed wasn't its only achievement. The 328 was also beautiful, with flowing bodywork that balanced aerodynamics with aesthetic grace. And it could race. The 328 dominated its class in motorsport, winning the 1940 WWII, one of the most prestigious races in the world, at an average speed of over 166 kilometers per hour. This wasn't just a victory, it was a statement. BMW had gone from building licensed copies of a British economy car to creating sports cars that could compete with and defeat the best in Europe. All of this in less than a decade. The transformation was remarkable, but it wasn't random luck or chance. It was the inevitable result of a specific culture meeting a specific challenge. Think about what actually happened here. BMW didn't choose to become a car company because they loved automobiles. They became a car company because they were banned from making what they actually loved: aircraft engines. They started by building someone else's design because they needed revenue immediately. But the moment they touched that Austin 7, their engineering culture took over. They couldn't build a mediocre car even if they tried. The precision, the obsessive refinement, the constant incremental improvement, these weren't marketing strategies. They were reflexes, ingrained habits from aircraft engine production, where imperfection could mean death at altitude. This is the accident. BMW didn't accidentally acquire a car company or accidentally hire good engineers. The accident was that their aircraft engine culture, a culture forged in the demands of military aviation where reliability wasn't optional, proved to be the perfect foundation for building driver-focused automobiles. When you've spent years making engines that have to perform flawlessly while someone shoots at you, you develop a pathological attention to detail. When you've calibrated carburetors for thin air at 6,000 meters, you understand precision in ways that purely automotive engineers might not. But we need to talk about what happened next, because BMW's story was about to be interrupted again. World War II began in September 1939, and BMW found itself pulled back into aircraft engine production. The Treaty of Versailles restrictions had been abandoned by Nazi Germany, and BMW's expertise was needed. By 1941, BMW was producing engines for the Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighter, and later for the first operational jet aircraft, the BMW 3 turbojet. The company that had been forced out of aviation in 1919 was now 2 decades later, building some of the most advanced aircraft engines in existence. The wartime period was productive for BMW's engine division, but catastrophic for the company's future. Their Munich factory was heavily bombed by Allied forces. The Eisenach plant, where BMW had built their first cars, ended up in Soviet-occupied East Germany after the war. BMW lost access to it entirely, and the Soviets would eventually turn it into a separate entity that built cars under the EMW brand using BMW's designs. In 1945, BMW was once again prohibited from building aircraft engines, this time by the Allied Control Council. And once again, the company faced potential extinction. The immediate post-war years were desperate. BMW's Munich facilities were damaged and under Allied supervision. They couldn't build aircraft engines. They couldn't immediately restart car production at scale. What saved them initially was, ironically, the same thing that had helped in the 1920s motorcycles. BMW restarted motorcycle production in 1948 with the R24, and it sold well to a Germany desperate for affordable transportation. But motorcycles couldn't sustain the company's ambitions or workforce. BMW needed to build cars again, but post-war Germany was a completely different market. Here's where BMW's story gets genuinely fascinating, because the company made a critical error in judgment that nearly destroyed them. In 1951, BMW introduced the 501, their first post-war automobile. It was a large, luxurious sedan powered by a 2-liter 6-cylinder engine producing 65 horsepower. The 501 was beautifully built and engineered to BMW's exacting standards. It was also completely wrong for the market. Post-war Germany needed affordable transportation, not expensive luxury sedans. The 501, nicknamed the Baroque Angel for its ornate styling, sold poorly and cost far more to build than BMW could charge for it. BMW compounded this mistake with the 502, an even more luxurious version powered by BMW's first V8 engine. Then came the 503 and 507 sports cars. Absolutely gorgeous machines, especially the 507. Which is today considered one of the most beautiful cars ever made. But beauty doesn't pay bills. These cars were financial disasters. BMW was losing money on nearly every vehicle they sold. By 1959, the company was functionally bankrupt. The BMW board actually voted to sell the company to Daimler-Benz, their Stuttgart rivals. The deal seemed certain to close. This is the moment where BMW's story could have ended. Imagine BMW absorbed into Mercedes-Benz becoming a footnote in automotive history, the company that went from aircraft engines to a brief stint in car manufacturing before being acquired by their competitor. But something remarkable happened at the December 1959 shareholder meeting. A small shareholder named Herbert Quandt, an industrialist who'd been quietly buying BMW stock, stood up and made a counter-proposal. He would invest significant personal capital into BMW if the shareholders rejected the Mercedes deal. It was an audacious gamble. Why would someone invest in a failing car company? Quandt saw what others missed. He saw a company with exceptional engineering capability, a strong brand reputation for quality, and a skilled workforce. What BMW lacked wasn't talent. It was the right product for the market. The shareholders, perhaps driven more by pride than business sense, voted against the Mercedes merger and accepted Quandt's investment. This decision, made in a heated shareholder meeting, saved BMW's independence. But salvation meant nothing if BMW couldn't figure out what to build. And here's where the company's early history, that accidental journey from aircraft engines to economy cars to sports cars, finally came together. The answer came from an unexpected place, the Isetta. In 1955, desperate for revenue, BMW had licensed a bizarre Italian microcar design. a tiny bubble-shaped vehicle with a front-opening door and a motorcycle engine. The BMW Isetta was odd, even comical-looking, but it sold remarkably well in post-war Germany, where people needed cheap transportation. More importantly, it kept BMW's factories running and workers employed while the company figured out its next move. The Isetta wasn't prestigious, but it was profitable, and it bought BMW time. In 1961, BMW introduced the car that would define their future, the 1500. This was a compact sedan, smaller and more affordable than the Baroque luxury cars BMW had been building, but larger and more refined than the economy cars everyone else offered. The 1500 had a 1.5-liter four-cylinder engine producing 80 horsepower, which doesn't sound like much until you realize what BMW had created. A car that was practical enough for everyday use but engineered with sports car precision. It handled beautifully. The steering was direct and communicative. The engine was smooth and responsive. This was transportation that rewarded the driver, not just moved them from place to place. The 1500 established the formula that BMW follows to this day: the sports sedan. Not a sports car that you could barely drive daily, and not a sedan that drove like an appliance. Something in between, a car that made every commute feel engaging, that turned driving from a chore into something you might actually enjoy. This wasn't a new idea technically, but BMW executed it with a level of precision and refinement that reflected everything they'd learned since 1928. The inline-4 engine's smoothness came from aircraft engine balancing expertise. The chassis dynamics came from their sports car racing experience. The build quality came from that obsessive culture Popp and Franz had established decades earlier. The 1500 evolved into the 1600 and then the 1800, each iteration refining the formula, and then in 1966, BMW introduced something that would become legendary, the 2002. This was the 1600 body, with a 2-liter engine producing 100 horsepower. It could reach 100 kilometers per hour in about 11 seconds and hit a top speed of 180 kilometers per hour. These weren't supercar numbers, but in a practical, comfortable sedan that you could drive every day, they were revelatory. The 2002 made performance accessible. It democratized the sporting sedan concept. And here's what's beautiful about this. The 2002 wasn't radically innovative in terms of new technology. It was innovative in how it synthesized ideas, how it combined practicality with performance, how it balanced comfort with engagement. This synthesis was only possible because of BMW's unique journey. A company that had built aircraft engines understood precision and reliability in ways that shaped every component. A company forced to build economy cars had learned efficiency and packaging. A company that had built sports cars understood chassis dynamics and driver engagement. The 2002 was the accumulation of 35 years of accidental education. The 2002 became a sensation, particularly in the United States, where automotive journalist Bob Wallace praised it as the car that saved BMW and one of the most influential automobiles of all time. The 2002 created a new category in the American market, the European sports sedan. It proved that a practical four-door car could also be genuinely exciting to drive, and it established BMW's reputation in a market that would become crucial to the company's success. The 2002 Turbo, introduced in 1973, was even more significant than most people realize. It was BMW's first turbocharged production car and one of the first turbocharged sedans available to the public. With 170 horsepower from just 2 liters, it was genuinely fast, 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 6.9 seconds, when most sports cars struggled to break 8 seconds. But the Turbo also revealed something about BMW's approach to performance. They didn't just bolt on a turbocharger for raw power. They re-engineered the engine internals, upgraded the brakes, strengthened the suspension, widened the wheels. Every element was considered, refined, optimized. This was aircraft engine thinking, applied to automotive performance. The 2002 led directly to the 3 Series, introduced in 1975 as the E21. This wasn't just an evolution of the 2002, it was BMW codifying their philosophy into a platform that would become the backbone of the company. The 3 Series established BMW's naming convention and size categories. More importantly, it proved that the sports sedan formula wasn't a one-time success. The E21 sold over 1.3 million units and established the 3 Series as BMW's core model, a position it maintains nearly 50 years later. Think about that lineage, from the licensed Austin 7 copy, to the 303, to the 1500, to the 2002, to the 3 Series. Each step building on the last, each refinement adding to a growing body of knowledge. And then came the M division. In 1972, BMW created BMW Motorsport GmbH, initially to manage their racing programs. But in 1978, they released something extraordinary, the M1, a mid-engine supercar designed with help from Lamborghini and engineered to compete in motorsport. The M1 was stunning, but more important was what came next. In 1979, BMW Motorsport developed a racing version of the 3 Series for touring car competition. That race car, highly modified and incredibly successful, inspired BMW to create a road-going version. In 1986, they released the E30 M3. The E30 M3 is where everything comes together, where you can see the complete arc from 1928 to 1986. It had a 2.3-liter 4-cylinder engine that produced 200 horsepower, but what made it special wasn't the specifications, it was the integration. The engine was derived from BMW's motorsport knowledge. The suspension was tuned with obsessive precision. The aerodynamics were carefully developed. Every element worked together to create not just a fast car, but a balanced one, a car where the engineering served the driving experience. This wasn't accident anymore. This was deliberate mastery of principles that had been accidentally discovered decades earlier. Here's the connection that most people miss. The E30 M3's engine development philosophy, extracting high specific output through precision engineering rather than brute force, traces directly back to Max Fries's high-altitude carburetors in the BMW 3 aircraft engine. Fries understood that you could gain performance advantages through technical sophistication, through getting the details right, not just making things bigger. That same philosophy drove the M3's development. The S14 engine wasn't the largest in its class, but it was one of the most sophisticated, with individual throttle bodies and a motorsport-derived valve train that revved to 7,250 revolutions per minute. Precision over brute force. Aircraft engine thinking in automotive form. The E30 M3 became the most successful touring car in racing history, winning countless championships and establishing BMW M as the benchmark for performance. But more than victories, it established a character, a BMW M character, that continues today. M cars are fast, but they're not just about straight-line speed. They're about balance, precision, communication between car and driver. They're about engineering integration, where every system serves the driving experience. This philosophy didn't emerge from market research or focus groups. It emerged from a culture that started when aircraft engineers were forced to build cars and brought their obsessive precision with them. Let's trace the thread one more time to really understand how profound this accident was. In 1919, Franz Josef Popp had a workforce trained to build engines that had to function perfectly in combat conditions. That culture of precision and reliability, born from life or death stakes, was applied to motorcycles because aircraft engines were illegal. Then it was applied to licensed British economy cars, because BMW needed revenue. Those economy cars were incrementally improved because the engineers couldn't help applying their standards. Those improvements led to BMW's first original designs. Those designs incorporated Inline-Six engines, because that's what BMW engineers understood. Those engines were refined for smoothness and efficiency, because precision mattered more than raw power. That refinement philosophy led to sports cars like the 328. The 328's racing success proved performance could come from engineering sophistication. Post-war, BMW stumbled with luxury cars, but survived through economy vehicles like the Isetta. The Isetta's success funded development of the 1500. The 1500 established the sports sedan formula. The 2002 perfected it and made it globally relevant. The 3 Series codified it. The M division took it to its ultimate expression. Each step was logical, each decision built on what came before. But the foundation, that culture of precision engineering, was only there because BMW had been banned from making aircraft engines. Consider the alternative timeline. What if the Treaty of Versailles had allowed Germany to maintain limited aircraft production? BMW might have remained a specialized engine manufacturer, successful but small, focused on aviation. They might never have entered automotive production at all, or they might have entered it half-heartedly as a side business without bringing their full engineering culture to bear. The BMW we know, the ultimate driving machine, the benchmark for sports sedans, the company that makes driving feel like piloting, might never have existed. It took the catastrophic failure of being banned from aircraft production to accidentally create BMW's automotive identity. And here's what makes this story even more fascinating. BMW's competitors had different origin stories that shaped their different characters. Mercedes-Benz came from Karl Enz and Gottlieb Daimler's pioneering work in automotive engineering. They were automotive from the beginning. Their identity centered on being the inventors of the automobile. The first, the original. This bred a different philosophy: conservative refinement, evolutionary development, prestige through heritage. Mercedes doesn't chase the latest trends. They set standards and wait for others to catch up. That's an inventor's mindset. Porsche came from Ferdinand Porsche's consulting work and his son Ferry's personal desire to build the sports car he wanted to drive. Ferry famously said, "I couldn't find the car of my dreams, so I built it." The 356 Porsche's first car used Volkswagen Beetle components because that's what was available, but arranged them in service of driving dynamics. Porsche's identity is about purity of purpose, everything in service of the driving experience, compromises minimized. That's a sports car purist's mindset, and it came from a son building his dream rather than a company seeking market success. Audi came from the merger of 4 struggling companies: DKW, Horch, Audi, and Wanderer. That formed Auto Union in 1932. After being separated during East and West Germany's division, Audi was reformed under Volkswagen ownership in 1965 and spent decades playing catch-up to BMW and Mercedes. This underdog status drove Audi to pursue technical innovation as differentiation. Quattro all-wheel drive, aluminum space frames, LED lighting technology. Audi's identity became about technical advancement, about using engineering innovation to compete with rivals who had stronger heritage. That's a challenger's mindset, born from arriving late to the premium car market. But BMW's identity came from accident and necessity. They didn't choose driver focus as a market position. They discovered it through the process of applying aircraft engineering precision to cars they initially didn't even design themselves. This makes BMW's character fundamentally different. It's not about heritage like Mercedes, not about sports car purity like Porsche, not about technical innovation for its own sake like Audi. BMW's character is about a specific kind of engineering refinement that prioritizes the driver's experience, the connection between human and machine, the feeling that the car is an extension of your intentions. You can see this in modern BMWs in ways that directly trace back to those aircraft engine days. The Inline-Six engine that powers many BMWs today, including the M3 and M4 until recently, is a direct descendant of the engine format BMW chose for the 303 in 1933, which itself was chosen because it's what Max Friz and his team understood from building aircraft engines. The obsessive attention to steering feel, to brake pedal response, to throttle mapping, all of this comes from a culture that learned precision matters at 20,000 feet and never forgot it. Even BMW's recent controversial styling choices, like the enormous kidney grilles, connect back to the 303's original grilles from 1933. The kidney grille itself is a perfect symbol of this journey. It started as a functional cooling requirement on the 303, became a visual signature that distinguished every BMW from its competitors, and evolved over decades into the brand's most recognizable design element. Today, those grilles spark intense debate. Are they too large, too bold, too different from tradition? That debate itself is very BMW, because BMW's history isn't about respecting tradition for its own sake. It's about engineering evolution driven by purpose. The grilles grew because modern engine cooling demands increased, because aerodynamics required different shapes, because designers wanted to make a statement. Function, driving form, just like Max Frizz's carburetor design, driving the BMW 3's high-altitude performance. Let's talk about what this means for BMW today, because the company faces challenges that echo their 1919 crisis in interesting ways. The automotive industry is undergoing its most significant transformation since the internal combustion engine replaced horses. Electric powertrains are becoming mandatory in many markets. Autonomous driving technology is advancing. The very concept of driving, the human connection to machine control that defines BMW's identity, is being questioned. How does a company built on driver engagement survive in an era where driving itself might become optional? BMW's response reveals whether they learned the real lesson from their accidental journey. In 2011, they launched the i sub-brand with the i3 city car and i8 hybrid sports car. These weren't just electric vehicles with BMW badges. They were BMW's attempt to rethink mobility while maintaining their core identity. The i3 used carbon fiber construction to offset battery weight, prioritizing driving dynamics even in an urban electric car. The i8 combined a turbocharged three-cylinder engine with electric motors to deliver sports car performance with remarkable efficiency. Neither car was a massive sales success, but they proved BMW could innovate in new powertrains without abandoning their engineering philosophy. The iX and i4, introduced more recently, show BMW's evolved approach. The iX is an electric SUV that doesn't try to hide what it is. Those enormous kidney grilles are functional air intakes for cooling systems, just reimagined for electric powertrains. The i4 is an electric 4 Series that BMW explicitly tuned to feel like a BMW, with careful attention to steering weight, suspension response, and even synthesized driving sounds that give feedback to the driver. These aren't just electric cars with propellers on the hood. They're BMW's attempt to translate driver engagement into a new era, to prove that the human-machine connection can survive the transition from gasoline to electrons. And here's what's remarkable. BMW is approaching electrification with the same pragmatic flexibility that saved them in 1928. They're not making dramatic pronouncements about being all-electric by arbitrary dates. They're not abandoning internal combustion engines while markets still demand them. Instead, they're offering multiple powertrains, gasoline, diesel, plug-in hybrid, full electric, and letting customers choose. This is exactly what Franz Josef Popp did when he acquired the Dixie license. He didn't declare BMW was now purely an automotive company. He kept building motorcycles, kept looking for other opportunities, and let the market guide the evolution. Flexibility, adaptation, survival through pragmatism while maintaining engineering standards. But there's tension here, and BMW knows it. Their identity is wrapped up in driver engagement, in the joy of controlling a machine, in what they call sheer driving pleasure. What happens when increasing numbers of customers want the car to do the driving? When younger buyers see cars as transportation appliances rather than objects of passion? When environmental regulations make high-performance internal combustion engines economically unviable? These aren't hypothetical questions. They're the same existential challenges BMW faced in 1919 and 1945 and 1959. The technology changes, but the fundamental question remains. How do you preserve your identity when the world no longer wants what made you special? BMW's answer seems to be doubling down on what they learned accidentally, that precision engineering and attention to the driving experience can be applied to any powertrain, any vehicle type, any era. The same obsessive refinement that made the licensed Austin 7 better than its British parent can make an electric SUV more engaging than competitors' offerings. The same culture that produced high-altitude carburetors, and the E30 M3 can engineer electric motors and battery cooling systems. The technology changes, but the culture, that aircraft engine culture of precision and performance, remains. Consider the BMW M5, now in its 7th generation. The current F90 M5 competition has a 4.4-liter twin-turbocharged V8 producing 625 horsepower. It can accelerate from 0 to 100 km per hour in 3.3 seconds. These are supercar numbers in a practical sedan that you could daily drive in comfort. But what's interesting isn't the raw performance. Lots of companies can make fast cars now. What's interesting is that the M5 still prioritizes driver engagement in an era where that's increasingly rare. The steering is tuned for feedback. The chassis balance is meticulously developed. The controls are laid out to be intuitive and responsive. It's a 2-ton luxury sedan that tries very hard to make you forget its weight and feel connected to the road. This is the legacy of that accident in 1928. BMW didn't set out to become the company that makes driving feel special. They didn't start with a mission statement about the ultimate driving machine or sheer driving pleasure. They started with desperate corporate survival. Build anything legal that might sell. Keep the workforce employed. Don't go bankrupt. But their culture, that precision engineering culture born in aircraft engine development, transformed everything they touched. Even when they were just trying to survive, they couldn't help making things better, more refined, more precise. And over time, those incremental improvements, that relentless refinement, became BMW's identity. There's a beautiful irony in this story. BMW's greatest competitor, Mercedes-Benz, can trace their lineage to Carl Benz's patent Motorwagen from 1886, the first practical automobile. Mercedes built their identity on being first, on being the inventors, on setting the standard. The BMW, who came to cars by accident, who started with someone else's design, who only built cars because they were banned from building what they actually wanted. BMW created an identity that in many ways feels more relevant to enthusiast drivers today. Because Mercedes' identity is about prestige and heritage, BMW's identity, accidentally discovered, is about the driving experience itself. Think about the moments that could have ended BMW's automotive story. If the shareholder vote in 1959 had gone differently, BMW becomes part of Mercedes-Benz, and there's no 2002, no 3 Series, no M division. If Herbert Quandt hadn't seen potential where others saw only failure, BMW disappears. If the 1500 hadn't found its market, the company had no backup plan. Each of these moments was a near-death experience, and BMW survived them not through careful planning, but through a combination of desperation, luck, and that underlying engineering culture that kept producing good products even when the business strategy was confused. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Companies don't create culture through mission statements or branding exercises. Culture emerges from the challenges they face and how they respond. BMW's culture of precision engineering emerged from building aircraft engines where imperfection meant death. Their focus on driver engagement emerged from constantly fighting for survival, which meant their products had to be genuinely better to justify their existence. Their willingness to evolve and adapt emerged from being forced to reinvent themselves multiple times. You can't fake this. You can't manufacture it in a corporate retreat. It has to be earned through actual struggle, actual adaptation, actual survival. Today, when you slide into the driver's seat of any BMW from a base 3 Series to an M8 competition, you're experiencing the accumulated knowledge of nearly a century of accidental automotive education. That steering weight that gives you perfect feedback about tire grip, that comes from decades of obsessive chassis development that started because BMW engineers couldn't build a mediocre car even when copying someone else's design. The engine's smoothness and linear power delivery, that traces back to aircraft engine balancing techniques. The control layout that feels intuitive, the brake pedal that gives you precise modulation, the throttle response that matches your expectations. All of this is inherited knowledge, passed down through generations of engineers who learned by doing, by refining, by applying aircraft engine precision to automotive problems. The story of how BMW became BMW isn't a story of vision or grand strategy. It's a story of accident, necessity, and culture, of being forced to change and bringing your identity with you into each transformation, of not choosing your path but discovering it through the process of trying to survive. This makes BMW's identity more authentic in a way, more earned. They didn't decide to be the driver's car company. They discovered they were that company by repeatedly building cars that prioritized the driving experience because their culture couldn't do otherwise. And as BMW faces its next great transformation, electrification, autonomy, changing consumer preferences, they're drawing on this history, whether they explicitly acknowledge it or not. The company that survived being banned from aircraft engines, that survived post-war bankruptcy, that survived nearly being absorbed by Mercedes, is now being asked to survive the end of internal combustion dominance. The technology is different, but the existential challenge is familiar. And BMW's response, pragmatic adaptation while maintaining core engineering principles, follows exactly the pattern established in 1928 when Franz Josef Popp bought a license to build someone else's tiny British car. Here's what we can predict with reasonable confidence. BMW will survive this transition, but they'll be changed by it, just as they were changed by every previous transition. Some things will be lost. The sound of a naturally aspirated Inline-Six at 7,000 revolutions per minute might become a historical curiosity, but other things will persist, will evolve, will adapt. That obsessive attention to driver engagement will find new expression in how electric motors deliver torque, in how regenerative braking is calibrated, in how autonomous systems are designed to enhance rather than replace driver involvement. The technology changes, but the culture, that accident culture from 1928, adapts and persists. So the next time someone asks you what makes BMW different, what makes them BMW, you can tell them this story. Tell them about Max Frizz's high-altitude carburetor and how aircraft engine thinking became automotive excellence. Tell them about Franz Josef Popp making a desperate acquisition of a British car license and accidentally discovering his company's future. Tell them about engineers who couldn't help making improvements, even when they were just trying to build someone else's design. Tell them about the E30 M3 and how its engine philosophy traces directly back to 1920s aircraft engines. Tell them about the company that was forced to build cars because they couldn't build what they loved, and accidentally discovered they loved building cars in the process. But there's something deeper here that we need to understand. BMW's accidental journey from aircraft engines to automobiles wasn't just a corporate survival story. It was a cultural transmission, the transfer of engineering philosophy from one domain to another. And that transmission created something unique in automotive history. Because most car companies started as car companies, they hired automotive engineers, developed automotive expertise, and built automotive culture from scratch. BMW brought aircraft engine culture to automotive production, and that made all the difference. Think about what aircraft engine development demanded in the 1910s. And 1920s, you're building a machine that has to function perfectly while experiencing extreme temperature variations, vibration, and stress. There's no shoulder to pull over onto at 5,000 meters. Engine failure means the pilot probably dies. This creates a specific kind of engineering discipline, an obsession with reliability, with precision, with understanding exactly how every component behaves under stress. You don't guess. You don't approximate, you measure, you test, you verify. This wasn't optional. It was survival. Now imagine taking engineers trained in that environment and asking them to build cars. They can't turn off that discipline. They can't suddenly accept looser tolerances or approximated solutions. When they're assembling a tiny British economy car under license, they're still thinking like aircraft engineers. They're still measuring to fractions of a millimeter. They're still balancing components with precision that seems excessive for a car that costs a few hundred marks. But they can't help it. It's not about the product. It's about who they are, how they were trained, what they know quality means. This is why BMW's first cars, those licensed Dixie models, started developing a reputation for build quality that exceeded the Austin 7 they were copied from. It wasn't intentional differentiation, it was cultural leakage, aircraft engine standards bleeding into automotive production. And as BMW developed their own designs, this culture shaped every decision. The Inline-Six configuration wasn't just familiar, it was a format they understood at a molecular level. A format where their precision could create tangible advantages in smoothness and refinement. The attention to chassis balance wasn't marketing, it was engineers applying lessons learned from aircraft stability and control systems. And here's what makes this fascinating from a competitive standpoint. BMW's rivals couldn't replicate this culture even if they wanted to. Mercedes-Benz had their own prestigious heritage, but it was automotive heritage. They'd been building cars since Carl Benz created the patent motorwagon. Their culture was shaped by decades of automotive development, which created different priorities, different instincts. Mercedes pursued refinement and prestige, the continuation and evolution of automotive tradition. BMW pursued precision and performance almost pathologically, because their culture had been forged in a different crucible entirely. You can see this difference in how BMW and Mercedes approach similar problems. When Mercedes builds a luxury sedan, they're asking, how do we create the most refined, prestigious, comfortable automobile possible? When BMW builds a luxury sedan, they're asking, how do we create the most refined, prestigious, comfortable automobile possible while maintaining driver engagement? That second question, that insistence that even a luxury cruiser should reward the driver, comes directly from BMW's aircraft engine heritage. Aircraft weren't just transportation, they were machines that extended human capability, that required skill to operate, that rewarded precision. This thinking permeated BMW's automotive development. The 5 Series, introduced in 1972 as the E12, exemplifies this philosophy perfectly. Here was BMW's mid-size luxury sedan, designed to compete directly with Mercedes' W114/W115 models. But where Mercedes prioritized isolation and comfort, making the car feel substantial and removed from road imperfections, BMW prioritized communication and engagement. The 5 Series gave you more road feedback, more steering feel, more sense of connection to what the car was doing. This wasn't because BMW couldn't build a more isolated car. It was a deliberate choice, a reflection of their culture's belief that driving should be an active experience, not a passive one. This cultural difference created an interesting dynamic in the marketplace. Mercedes customers valued prestige, comfort, and the sense of owning automotive royalty, the car that invented the automobile. BMW customers valued performance, handling, and the sense of piloting a precision instrument. These weren't just different marketing positions, they were different philosophies stemming from different corporate DNA. And BMW's DNA, that aircraft engine DNA, proved remarkably appealing to a specific type of customer. The driving enthusiast who needed a practical car, but refused to surrender the joy of driving. The 7 Series, BMW's flagship luxury sedan introduced in 1977, revealed how deeply this philosophy ran. Here was BMW's answer to the Mercedes S-Class, the ultimate luxury sedan segment. BMW could have conceded this territory to Mercedes, could have accepted that flagship luxury meant Mercedes-style isolation and comfort. Instead, they built a large luxury sedan that still prioritized driver engagement. The E23 7 Series wasn't as soft or isolated as the W116 S-Class. It was firmer, more responsive, more communicative. Some critics said it compromised luxury for sportiness. BMW said it refused to compromise driving dynamics for any reason. Aircraft engine thinking, the pilot should always remain connected to the machine. And this brings us to perhaps the most important realization about BMW's accidental automotive journey. They didn't just survive by building cars, they thrived by building cars differently in a way that reflected their unique heritage. If BMW had tried to exactly copy Mercedes' approach, they would have failed. Mercedes had decades more automotive experience and heritage. If they'd tried to exactly copy Porsche's approach, they would have failed. Porsche had Ferdinand and Ferry's sports car purity vision. BMW succeeded by being BMW, by building cars the way aircraft engineers build things, and discovering there was a massive market for precisely that. The numbers tell this story clearly. In 1960, BMW sold fewer than 50,000 vehicles and was nearly bankrupt. By 1970, after the 150016001800 series established their sports sedan formula, BMW sold over 160,000 vehicles. By 1980, after the 3 Series and 5 Series proved the formula could scale, BMW sold over 340,000 vehicles. By 1990, with the M division creating a halo effect and BMW's reputation firmly established, they sold over 500,000 vehicles annually. This wasn't just growth, it was validation that BMW's accidental philosophy resonated with customers worldwide. And the geographical expansion tells an even more interesting story. BMW's breakthrough in the United States, the market that would become their largest outside Germany, came from the 2002. American automotive journalists, raised on American muscle cars and European sports cars, encountered the 2002 and didn't quite know how to categorize it. It wasn't a sports car. It had 4 doors and a decent trunk. It wasn't a muscle car. It only had 100 horsepower. It wasn't a luxury car. The interior was nice, but not opulent. But it was engaging, rewarding, fun to drive every single day. It created its own category, and American enthusiasts embraced it. This American success had profound implications for BMW's development. The U.S. market valued performance and individual expression over traditional prestige hierarchies. American BMW customers weren't buying the car because it signaled their social status. They were buying it because they enjoyed driving and wanted a car that amplified that enjoyment. This customer base pushed BMW to be even more focused on driving dynamics, to be even more willing to prioritize engagement over comfort. The American market accidentally reinforced the culture that BMW had accidentally developed from their aircraft engine heritage. By the 1980s, BMW had achieved something remarkable. They'd created a global identity based on an accident from the 192OS. The ultimate driving machine slogan, introduced in the U.S. in 1973, wasn't invented in a marketing meeting. It was the distillation of what BMW had accidentally discovered they were good at. Creating cars that made driving feel special, that connected driver to machine, that prioritized the experience of piloting over the experience of being transported. This was aircraft thinking applied to automobiles, and it worked because there were millions of people who wanted exactly that. The M division's expansion in the 1980s and 1990s showed how far BMW could push this philosophy. The E30 M3, introduced in 1985, took a practical sedan and gave it a 286 horsepower Inline-Six, derived from the M1 supercar's engine. This was absurd, a family sedan with supercar power. But it was also very BMW. Why should practicality mean compromising performance? Why should 4 doors mean boring? The M5 proved you could have a car that your family could use for the school run on Monday, and that you could drive at genuinely exciting speeds on a weekend road trip. Aircraft engineers thinking, why accept limitations when engineering can overcome them? The Z3 Roadster, introduced in 1995, represented something different, BMW's first modern mass-market sports car. Built in Spartanburg, South Carolina, the Z3 was significant, not just as a product, but as evidence of BMW's confidence. They were comfortable enough in their identity to build a traditional 2-seat roadster, a format they hadn't really explored since the 507 in the 195OS. The Z3 wasn't revolutionary. It was a straightforward, honest sports car. But it was honest in a very BMW way, prioritizing driving feel and mechanical engagement over raw performance, numbers, or exotic styling. As we move into the 2000s, BMW faced new challenges that tested whether their accidental philosophy could survive in changing times. The automotive market was shifting toward SUVs and crossovers, vehicles that seemed fundamentally opposed to BMW's driver-focused identity. How do you make a tall, heavy SUV drive like a BMW? The answer came in 1999 with the X5, BMW's first SUV, and here's where BMW's engineering culture proved its worth. They didn't just build an SUV and badge it BMW, they engineered it to drive more like a car than any SUV had before. The E53 X5 had a lower center of gravity than competitors, more sophisticated suspension, more communicative steering, better weight distribution. It couldn't escape physics. It was still taller and heavier than a sedan, but it drove better than an SUV had any right to. This was BMW applying aircraft engine thinking to a new problem. You can't change fundamental constraints, but you can optimize within them. You can find advantages through precision and attention to detail. The X5 proved BMW's philosophy could adapt to new vehicle formats without being diluted. But there were missteps too, moments when BMW seemed to lose touch with their own identity. The E65 7 Series, introduced in 2001, was controversial for its styling and its iDrive control system, a central controller for all vehicle functions that initially frustrated customers. The car was technologically advanced, even brilliant in many ways. But the interface between human and machine, the thing BMW was supposed to understand better than anyone, felt compromised. Customers complained that simple tasks required navigating through multiple menus. This was the opposite of aircraft cockpit design, where critical controls needed to be immediately accessible. BMW learned from this mistake, refined iDrive in subsequent generations, and the system eventually became intuitive and industry-leading. But the E65's troubled reception was a warning. BMW's identity wasn't about technology for its own sake. It was about technology that enhanced the human connection to the machine. Any innovation that interfered with that connection, even if technically sophisticated, violated BMW's core purpose. This was a lesson their aircraft engine heritage should have taught them. The pilot needs to remain in control, needs to understand what's happening, needs to feel connected to the machine. The financial crisis of 2008-2009 created another test. The automotive industry collapsed. Sales plummeted. Governments had to bail out major manufacturers. BMW, having avoided the worst strategic mistakes of their competitors, survived without government assistance. But they had to make choices about their future direction. Would they pursue growth at any cost, diluting their identity to capture more market share? Or would they remain focused on their core philosophy, accepting that this meant being a specialized manufacturer rather than a volume leader? BMW chose focus. They expanded their lineup carefully. The 1 Series provided an entry point. The X3 and X6 captured SUV segments. The Grand Coupe variants attracted buyers who wanted coupe styling with sedan practicality. But every expansion maintained the core philosophy: driver engagement, precision engineering, performance orientation. BMW grew, but they grew strategically, never abandoning what made them BMW. This was Franz Josef Popp's pragmatism from 1928. Adapt to survive, but bring your culture with you into each adaptation. And this brings us to the present moment, where BMW faces perhaps their most significant challenge since the Treaty of Versailles banned aircraft production. The automotive industry is electrifying. Internal combustion engines, the format where BMW's Inline-Six heritage and M division expertise shine brightest, are being regulated out of existence in major markets. Autonomous driving technology threatens to make human driving optional or even prohibited in some scenarios. The very thing that defines BMW, the driving experience, the human-machine connection, seems threatened by technological and regulatory forces beyond any company's control. BMW's response reveals whether they truly understand their own history. The iX represents their current thinking, a large electric SUV that doesn't apologize for what it is. Those enormous kidney grilles are functional, cooling electric motors and battery packs. The interior is minimalist but luxurious, with sustainable materials and advanced technology. But most importantly, BMW engineered the iX to drive like a BMW. The steering weight, the chassis tuning, the brake feel, the way power is delivered, all of it calibrated to feel connected, responsive, engaging. This is BMW asking, can you create driver engagement with electric motors instead of pistons? The i4 M50 provides another data point. An electric 4 Series with 544 horsepower and 0-100 km per hour in 3.9 seconds. But the performance numbers aren't the interesting part. The interesting part is that BMW programmed the accelerator response, the steering weight, the brake regeneration, even the artificial sound piped into the cabin to create a specific feeling, a BMW feeling. They're trying to translate their culture into a new technological language. Whether they'll succeed remains to be seen, but the attempt itself is revealing. Because here's what BMW seems to understand. Their identity isn't actually about internal combustion engines. It's about a culture of precision engineering in service of driver engagement. That culture was forged in aircraft engine production, accidentally applied to automobiles, and refined over decades of building cars. But it's the culture that matters, not the specific technology. Internal combustion was just the medium through which that culture expressed itself for most of BMW's automotive history. Electric powertrains are a different medium, but the culture, the obsessive attention to detail, the focus on human-machine connection, can theoretically transfer. Think about what this means. In 1919, BMW had to abandon aircraft engines and eventually found their way to automobiles. Now, a century later, they're being asked to abandon internal combustion dominance and find their way to electric powertrains. The technology changes, but the challenge is the same: preserve your culture while adapting to forces you can't control. If BMW succeeds in making electric cars that feel distinctly BMW, that maintain driver engagement in a new technological paradigm, they'll have proven that their aircraft engine heritage created something truly enduring, not just specific products, but a way of thinking about human-machine interaction. And maybe that's the ultimate lesson from BMW's accidental automotive journey. Companies that survive long-term aren't those with the best products in any given moment. They're companies with cultures resilient enough to adapt while maintaining identity. BMW's culture was accidentally created when aircraft engineers were forced to build cars. But once created, that culture proved adaptable across decades of technological change, market shifts, competitive threats, and internal crises. The Inline-Six format might disappear. The exhaust note of a high-revving, naturally aspirated engine might become historical curiosity. But the culture that says the driver should feel connected to the machine, engineering should serve that connection, and precision matters above all, that culture can survive format changes. So, when you look at BMW today, at their electric vehicles, their continued internal combustion performance cars, their SUVs and sedans and coupes, you're seeing the latest expression of an accident from 1928. An aircraft engine company, banned from building what they loved, desperately acquired a license to build a British economy car. Their engineers, trained to aircraft standards, couldn't help improving it. Those improvements revealed a philosophy. That philosophy, refined and developed over decades, became BMW's identity. And that identity, forged in failure and desperation, accidentally created one of the world's most valuable automotive brands. The Treaty of Versailles tried to destroy German aviation. Instead, it accidentally created the ultimate driving machine. That's not just irony, it's a reminder that our greatest strengths often emerge from our worst failures, that identity is discovered through struggle rather than chosen in comfort, and that sometimes the best thing that can happen to a company is being forced to become something they never intended to be. BMW didn't choose to build cars. They were forced into it. But in that forced transformation, they discovered who they really were. And that accidental discovery changed automotive history. Today, when someone asks what makes a BMW different from a Mercedes or an Audi or any other premium car, the answer isn't in the specifications or the technology. It's in this story. It's in understanding that BMW's character wasn't designed by marketers or strategists. It was accidentally forged when aircraft engineers banned from building engines that flew brought their obsessive precision to engines that rolled. It was refined through decades of survival, through near bankruptcy and forced reinvention, through the constant pressure of having to prove they belonged in an industry they never intended to enter. Every BMW that rolls off a production line today, whether it's powered by gasoline, electricity, or some future technology we haven't invented yet, carries this heritage in its DNA. The way the steering communicates road surface texture, the way the throttle responds to your right foot, the way the whole car feels like an extension of your intentions, rather than a separate machine you're commanding. All of this traces back to Max Friz designing carburetors for thin air at altitude, to Franz Josef Popp desperately buying a British car license to keep his workforce employed, to engineers who couldn't build a mediocre product even when they were just copying someone else's design. This is why BMW's story matters beyond just automotive history. It's a lesson about identity, about culture, about how the things that define us often come from the challenges we never wanted to face. BMW didn't want to stop building aircraft engines. They were forced to. They didn't want to build cars. They had to. But in being forced to reinvent themselves, they discovered something more valuable than they'd lost, a unique identity that no competitor could replicate, because no competitor had walked the same accidental path. And as you watch BMW navigate the transition to electric vehicles, to autonomous technology, to whatever comes next in automotive evolution, remember this story. Remember that the company facing these challenges is the same company that survived being banned from aircraft production, that survived post-war devastation, that survived nearly being absorbed by Mercedes, that turned every existential crisis into an opportunity for reinvention. The technology will change. The products will evolve. But that culture, that aircraft engine culture of precision and performance, adapts and persists. So, the next time you see those twin kidney grills approaching in your rear-view mirror, or you slide into the driver's seat of any BMW from any era, remember, you're not just experiencing a car. You're experiencing the unintended consequence of a 1919 treaty, the accumulated wisdom of engineers forced to reinvent themselves, the legacy of a company that accidentally discovered its purpose by losing everything it thought mattered. You're experiencing what happens when failure forces innovation, when desperation breeds excellence, when aircraft engineers build cars and can't help making them extraordinary. BMW's first car wasn't designed in Munich. It was designed in Birmingham, England by Herbert. But BMW transformed it, refined it, made it better through their culture. And in that transformation, they discovered who they were, not the company they intended to be, but the company they needed to become. That accidental discovery, that forced evolution, that journey from aircraft engines to the ultimate driving machine, changed automotive history. And it all started with a failure, a desperate acquisition, and engineers who refused to accept mediocrity, even when building someone else's design. That's the real BMW story. That's the secret hidden in plain sight for nearly a century. And now you know it too. If this story changed how you see BMW, or if you've learned something about German automotive history you never knew before, let us know in the comments below. What other hidden stories from German car history should we explore? Which brands or models have secrets worth uncovering? Subscribe and join us as we dig deeper into the engineering, the rivalries, the failures and triumphs that created the cars we love today. Because every great car has a story, and sometimes the best stories are the ones that were never supposed to happen.